The cruise that turned into a nightmare for 400 Americans might be over, but for 3,000 passengers remaining on the Diamond Princess cruise ship, their fate is still in the air. The US government evacuated 2 plane loads of citizens from the ship this morning, flying them from Tokyo to military bases in California and Texas, where they will remain in quarantine for another 14 days. It comes as the number of affected passengers has risen to 350. Now, that is the single biggest outbreak outside of China. Plans to get the 11 remaining New Zealand passengers on board the ship home are underway, but no timeframe has been set yet. CNN's Will Ripley is in Yokohama and joins me now live.
Hi, Lisa. Yes, good to finally be able to speak with you. Sorry about that phone issue earlier. So I'm looking at the Diamond Princess right now. It's such an interesting contrast. It's a beautiful day. The ship is sparkling in the sunshine here in Yokohama, and yet inside, you have these passengers who remain under very uncomfortable conditions. They're quarantined in their rooms, trying to make the best of it. We know that the Americans are just hours away from touching down at military bases in California and Texas. And we know that plans are in the works for a similar evacuation effort, flights and whatnot, for the Canadian passengers. Japanese remain on the ship right now, but other countries are also following suit. We know that Australia, Italy are amongst the countries that are going to be repatriating their citizens, South Korea as well. But in terms of the timeline, people have not been given that information just yet. It now seems that it's likely that most passengers will be staying on the ship through what they were initially told was going to be the end of their ordeal, the 14-day quarantine period due to end on the 19th, which is Wednesday. However, instead of having to basically find their own hotels and ride out a 14-day quarantine here in Japan, what the governments are going to be providing are flights back home and then accommodations for additional 14-day quarantines in their respective countries. So we were sent a link for a resort in Canada where apparently the Canadians are going to be put up. It looks quite comfortable, actually, quite a different situation than the Americans who are going to be basically in kind of military-based housing after their ordeal, if you will, of travel on a converted cargo plane, which I was able to see some pictures from the inside. It's certainly not a cushy, comfortable flight home, but for a lot of those people, they're certainly glad to be getting back to their home countries, back on home soil with doctors that they can more easily communicate with, and hopefully one step closer to finally getting back to their homes and their lives, which have essentially been on hold throughout all of this.
Absolutely. The other thing I'm really interested in, you say, there's some passengers might not be able to leave on that set deadline of when the quarantine time is up. But we've heard, obviously, that the Japanese medical teams can only test 300 people a day, realistically, in terms of getting results and taking the tests. There is a suggestion that every single passenger may have to be tested before they leave the ship. Well, the maths just doesn't add up for them all getting off on time, does it?
Exactly. And even though Japan is making efforts to try to more than triple that amount, so by Wednesday, they're saying, or even by tomorrow, they might be able to process a total of 1,000 test kits per day because they've opened it up from just government-run laboratories to private laboratories to process these throat swabs that passengers are getting. But yes, for their peace of mind and honestly for the peace of mind of people back in their countries, everybody's going to have to get a test, and they're going to have to get a negative test result before they are allowed to get off the ship and head home. Everybody who tests positive, and that includes more than 24 American citizens, they have to then go directly to quarantine wards at Japanese hospitals in 9 different prefectures that are currently handling more than 400 coronavirus cases here in this country. So for some, the ordeal is not going to be over because they haven't gotten their test results back yet.
So do you know anything or have you heard anything of the 2 New Zealanders who are in hospital? And what happens with people who are in hospital in terms of them being repatriated?
I have not had contact with the New Zealanders, and of course, we're always trying to reach out to see how everybody is doing. But I can tell you what I have seen are the conditions in the quarantine wards from the patients that we have been communicating with from the United States. And usually what this looks like, it's not like the pictures that you're seeing out of China where they've built these hospitals up in, a week or so, and patients are kind of lying in beds next to each other with doctors in full hazmat gear. Usually people have their own private room. The room is sealed off with plastic wrap at the door. And everybody who comes in, obviously, is in full hazmat gear with respirators and whatnot to prevent them from having any sort of physical contact with the patients. But, for example, if somebody on the outside, a loved one, is able to send in food, like a hamburger or, a meal that's not the hospital food that a lot of patients have kind of been complaining about, they can do that. People can get their personal effects sent to them, like their luggage and their clothing. People are starting to be able to get laundry done. And so I think it's incredible the ability of people to adapt to difficult circumstances and to just try to make the most of it, watching television, texting on social media, finding some good books, and just trying to take it one day at a time.
So the Diamond Princess has announced that this ship is not going to sail again officially until April 20th. Now, that is a lot of time. Why is that?
I think there's going to be an extensive decontamination process. They have to be absolutely certain that every single surface on that ship has been scrubbed and sanitized to ensure that nobody runs the risk of touching a contaminated surface, because we know that this virus is spread from person-to-person contact, but also if you have contact with a tabletop or a toilet seat or anything that somebody who's infected might have touched. So they're going to have to scrub every single inch of that ship, and I'm sure that's a long, time-consuming process. Not to mention the fact that I think for any passengers who have future trips booked, they're going to want to have absolute certainty that every step has been taken to make sure that that ship is free of the novel coronavirus before they're comfortable getting on board.
Thank you so much, Will. That is Will Ripley from CNN there. He is in Yokohama and has been following closely what's going on with the Diamond Princess cruise ship there.